Hi everyone, this is Neil with Rock Our World. I'm going to do follow-up on my last video, which I named the Bride of Yahushua, appointed time. Yeshua's appointed time. I'm going to upgrade the name to Yahushua and call it part 2. So, Bride of Yahushua, part her appointed time, and part 2. Anyway, I want to make a point that I still use the name Jesus because that's what most people in the believing world of Christianity, that is, that's what they call him, even though that is not his name. That's one of those things the Constantine Dream Team came up with. They just made it up, just like they just made up Pentecost. And another one I've pointed out in the past, in the book of Revelation, it does not say that Yeshua or Yahushua is the Alpha and Omega. It doesn't say that. It wasn't written in Greek, and the Constantine Dream Team came up with that, threw that curve in there. What it does say is that Yahushua, our Messiah, is the Aleph Tav, and that's the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So, it solves a mystery, because that's a word. Those two letters put together, Aleph Tav, make a word that was inserted in the Hebrew text many times, right through the Torah, prophets, and writings, and ancient sages and scholars and studiers of the Torah, prophets, and writings through the ages didn't know what that word meant. It was a mystery. And here Yeshua is explaining the mystery. He says, I am the Aleph Tav. So anyway, that's one more thing that God is restoring in these last days, and many, many things. So what I'm going to do a little bit more complete job of going through the appointed times, the full year, and touch on the Sabbath and the new moon. And I've done these things many times over 6.5 years, but I know I feel to keep going back to the important things and go over them a number of times. And there's always new people signing up and becoming students. That's my this is the school of Neil. Hopefully I don't have too many errors wrapped up in this these messages. I know I'm a human, but this is the time of the restoration of all things. And the subtitle to this channel is keeping believers up to date with what has been restored so far in the restoration of all things. And while I'm on that topic, I have one point in here. I'll cover it right now. If you study those scriptures in Acts 2, you go from 17 to 26, I believe it is, and you see that Peter is he's quoting, one of the things he quotes is Moses, who was a prophet. And Moses prophesied that in the last days, as this time we're in right now unfolds, that God would raise up a person. I changed it to, he always referred to as a male, but he would raise up a person, and that person would speak for God. And he said, you listen to that person. And anyway, I had watched an old video, I think it was 242 on the Sabbath day. And I thought, hey, like 2 years ago, what did I say? Now, this is pretty good, actually, but I had forgotten. I pointed out that I believe that person to be the bride. And of course, the bride, as I've been proposing and teaching is 144,000 people. And there's always people giving me comments. No, it's just one person. So that's a paradigm. And again, at the end of the story, our opinions aren't going to change whatever the truth is. So our objective is to search for truth and get as close as we can and keep working on that, getting closer and closer to the truth and receiving this time of restoration that God is restoring things. That's what we're going through right now. So he's clearing up old misinformation and giving us truth. And our quest is then keep going along this path and or receive truth. I had one guy that I have spent quite a bit of time with the last few years. He watched quite a number of my videos, and finally he said to me, "Neil, where do you get this stuff?" And I think his implication was that surely you couldn't get it straight from God. You have to go through some other guy that is further up the food chain than you are. Anyway, at the end of the story, it's all of our challenge to follow up on things. So one of the big things I always teach is prove to yourself what the Sabbath day is, because God says over and over and over and over, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And he's talking about his Sabbath day. And you can prove that the Jewish Sabbath of Saturday is in error. It's not right. And you can prove that the Christian Sabbath of Sunday is not right. So those are men's Sabbaths, but God wants us to keep his Sabbath. So anyway, the challenge then is follow up on the scriptures I give and the reasoning, and take it to the Lord in prayer and fasting and so on. And if you will go through that door of keeping the Sabbath the best you can, and if you've got a Monday to Friday job, I'm not advocating that you quit your job and do all this stuff, but sooner or later you'll be able to keep the Sabbath, and you can certainly track when it is, so that even if you have to go to work, you bear that in mind. And God sees your heart, and eventually perhaps you'll work up the courage to ask your employer or to give you that time off, even some of the times. Anyway, be creative and take everything to the Lord in prayer. And it's always amazed me throughout my whole walk with God, now 46 years, how God can make a way for things. Not everything we ask for gets answered the way we'd like to, but lots of things do get answered, and often in a very unique and unusual way. Anyway, I better get rolling here. I'm at 8 minutes. So that was one thing I covered, I think. That person that Moses prophesied, not Moses, yes, Moses, the prophet Moses. No. Yes. When he said that person, he said, listen to that person. And I said, well, I think that's the bride. That person is the bride. So we're using all these metaphors. Okay, now I'm going to, it's going to seem a little scattered here. I'm going to go through a few points, and this was a brand new revelation here. Take a look at Matthew 25:7, and I'm reading here from my Ain't. There we go. By Andrew Roth. If you can get a hold of this, apparently it's hard to come by. It is the most accurate translation from the original Aramaic. Like the Greek is all bogus. Constantine pulled that one off. He rewrote the original Aramaic into Greek and made a whole bunch of changes. So whenever you get into your so-called New Testament, what the Christians I call the apostolic writings, be suspicious of things. So there's all kinds of misinformation worked into the text. Anyway, in Matthew 25, 7 to 11, in the original 8, God is talking about, I'll just read it to you. Then all those virgins arose, and maybe I should back up to 6. And in the middle of the night there was an outcry, behold, the bridegroom comes, go out for his meeting. And this is what I would call the Lord coming as a thief in the night. Not his final return in great power and glory, and where everything in creation will know what's going on. Okay, go out for his meeting. Then all those virgins arose and prepared their lamps. And those foolish virgins were saying to the wise, give us some of your oil, for behold, our lamps have gone out. These wise virgins answered and said, what if there is not enough to buy for us and you? Rather go to those who sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready entered with him into the banquet hall, and the door was locked. Now later also came these other virgins, and were saying, our master, open the door for us. And he answered and said, truly I say to you, I do not know you. Anyway, one of the points here is that, like we have this analogy, this elaborate analogy of a wedding, and I've pointed people to the 3 groups of firstfruits, the bride, the attendants, and the guests to the wedding. This is not talking about that. This is a different analogy, a different metaphor. He's talking about virgins, which would be best described as people who have made a decision to believe in God and to serve God. And they have, in Christians' terminology, they've given their life to the Lord and become saved. Now, in Jewish terminology, I don't know how they would say this, but make sure you know this, that the Jewish people, the being they call Hashem, who led the children of Israel out of Egypt and through the wilderness, that was and is the same one that Christians call Jesus. And if that's a surprise to you, which it really shouldn't be, but read 1 Corinthians 10, 1-4. It says exactly that. And of course, the events as those things unfolded include that Moses went up to the mountain and received the fullness of the Torah, like wrote it down. But if you read all 3 accounts of the Exodus, God started, Yahushua started teaching the Israelites as soon as they were leaving Egypt, like he was teaching them all the way along. And he, like I said in my last, actually it was my commentary. Make sure you read the commentaries. I refer to Jubilees chapter 50 verse 1, where it says, I showed you the days of the Sabbaths in the desert between Elim and Sinai. And to be able to show all the signs for the various Sabbath days, like the 4 in a moon cycle, and then the new moon festival, which follows directly after those 4 weeks that are pointed out by the moons. All of them need signs. So it takes a full moon cycle to show the people all the signs for all the Sabbaths. And the new moon festival is kept in the same manner as the Sabbath day, in that you do not work at your regular occupation where you make money and make a living, and you make efforts to make it a delight to keep the Sabbath day, to take this day off and rest and have it be delightful, so that you look forward to it. You look forward to the Sabbath day and you look forward to the new moon festival. And both of them, I might as well cover this right now, are talking about the kingdom. The Sabbath day is talking about the first 1,000 years of the kingdom. And then the New Moon Festival is talking about and revealing the balance of the kingdom, which is eternal. That is the eternal time, forever and ever and ever and ever, that we will all be together in God's, what He's creating, His enlarged family. So those two festivals, which the moon looks after in its cycle, and I call it the moon calendar, found in the book of Enoch between chapter 72 and 80. The moon looks after the message about the kingdom, and that's what Yeshua always insisted he was talking about. He came to announce the kingdom, to bring the good news of the kingdom to us. And Christians have developed this theology that we got to preach the gospel, and that's not what Jesus said. He said he came to bring us the good news and the hope of the kingdom. Anyway, let's get on with this. So back to the wise and foolish virgins, it's not talking about the wedding analogy. It's talking about believers who have made this initial commitment to learn God's ways. Now, there's a broad spectrum of people. Once they do that, some of them are lazy and don't put lots of effort into it, or start with a good push and slow down, and Christian terminology become backslidden or just stagnant or whatever. And then there's others that pursue the Lord with their whole heart, and then everything in between. So what's being revealed here in this, whatever we want to call it, this teaching that Yeshua gave us, is that the door will be shut on the lazy ones, and God picks where the dividing line is, and the ones who have prepared themselves, overcome things. That's a big one. Overcome what? Sin. Overcome sin. So you can't overcome sin if you don't know what sin is. Well, sin is the transgression of the Torah. So that's 1 John 3:4. And the new covenant is the time when the Lord will write His Torah on our minds and our hearts. And that's Jeremiah 31 to 34. Anyway, we've gone through this exercise for these 2,000 years, and Christianity and Judaism have muddied the waters, and they have, in terms of Ezekiel 34, the evil shepherds have muddied the water and eaten the sheep. And that means they work for pay, and because they work for pay, they teach the people what their itching ears want to hear, not the truth. And muddying the waters means to teach false doctrine. So the Lord assures us in Ezekiel 34 that He's going to get rid of all these evil shepherds. So that time has come upon us. God is bringing everything into the light, all the evil. Now back to these wise and foolish virgins. There's two places I'm going to say that this division is being made. And the first one is very close. I'm going to say the divide line between the bride and the attendants. So the ones that are ready right now, or whenever Julie Whedbee's announcement that the bride's appointed time has come and it's time to enter the bridal chamber, that's the dividing line. Whenever that comes, she says it's right now, but I have proposed that what she means, or what God means by it, is that the next time the Feast of Weeks rolls around, that's when it'll happen. That's the time of the latter rain, the great outpouring we see in Joel. So that's one of the divisions between the bride and the attendants. And in Rick Joyner's vision, which I have encouraged everyone to get a copy and read it, it's God's vision, not Rick Joyner's. Rick was given very simple instructions. Copy this down as accurately as you can. Don't mix in your own theology, obviously, because it's wrong. So then the second dividing line is then between the attendants and the guests to the wedding. So I'm going to propose that this happens twice, where the Lord draws a line, so to speak, and he says, you people that have prepared yourselves, you go in and the door is shut, and then that happens a second time too. And perhaps I'll get that far, but I doubt it. So this looks like it'll go on into a third one, but I'll try and explain that a little bit more clearly or fully. But right now the important point is between the bride and the attendants. Now, it wasn't that long ago. We were getting ready to do a TV show out of Regina here, Access TV. They need religious programming, like content from local content. Anyway, we were making this series called The Word. And anyway, I was sitting and visiting with one of the people. Actually, I was going to be her host, and she was going to talk about, I think it was the days of Noah, how right now is like the days of Noah. Anyway, she made this comment that the bridesmaids are not the bride. And it was like, well, that's pretty simple, but why didn't I see that before? And then I immediately, within a very short time, realized, hey, so the third group, I already knew there was 3 groups of firstfruits, but I didn't pinpoint it to a name. And then, of course, then you can go to scriptures and get details. But the third group is called the guests to the wedding. So in these last, let's call it 3 years or so, I have made a point of saying there's 3 groups of firstfruits. And the ones that are ready now, there's just a few of them. There's 144,000, and they are the bride. So there's going to be a dividing line between them and the attendants. So that's the first place this applies. When the Lord comes as a thief in the night, and those who are ready go in, and those who are short of oil, that means they haven't been as diligent as they could have. And God's the one that makes that decision, who's ready and who's not. But he's, as we read in Revelation 7:1-8, that there's a time period where the 4 winds are held up, which are the 4 horsemen, the 4 colored horses. They're held back while this process goes on. Well, 144,000 are marked. And I'm going to say that process is almost complete. And when Julie announced time is up and the appointed time has come, the next step is we have to identify the appointed time of the bride, because there are 8 yearly appointed times, and I just briefly covered Sabbath and the New Moon Festival, which are both talking about the coming kingdom. The Sabbath day referring to the 1,000-year kingdom, where there will still be humans, but there won't be Satan. He's in a prison. And he's going to be released right at the end. And then there will be the great white throne judgment, also right after Satan is released for that 50 years and then put away. And then comes the eternal kingdom. And that's what the New Moon Festival is teaching us. When we observe it, we will have revelation. If we do not observe these things, we will have limited revelation. We'll be on one, just to make a point, that would be one of the things that would put us on one line or the other when God is making this division between those who are ready and those who are not. It's our choice to listen to things and then turn around and do them, like explore them. At least look up the scriptures, prove it out, use all the tools God's given us, and then do it, or take the other route and, well, that sounds great, and maybe even look it all up and say, well, this sure looks like it could be right, but then don't do it. So the Lord says, it is the doers of the word that are justified, not the hearers only. So hearing is important, but doing then is the next important thing you want to do. You don't want to leave that part out. Okay, 25 minutes. Okay, so we'll set that one aside, and we'll go down here. I want to comment on the Feast of Teruah. I went through it in my last video, and I explained that if you will look up the few places, and you can make this really quick with a computer, good computer program. Find the 10 or so I said. I don't know the exact number. I did this years and years ago. I became suspicious that Teruah, the Feast of Teruah, doesn't mean the Feast of Trumpets. And that's what we have called it, just accepting that that's its name. So Teruah does not mean trumpets. And if you look those uses up, you can teach yourself what it means. It basically means a very loud, a very a sense of alarm and of jubilation mixed together. And the sound most often made with the human voice, or the voice of angels, or the voice of God, or likely everything mixed together, but it's very, very loud. So, and it is a sound that suggests both victory and war. So anyway, what I want you to do, I just saw this when I was teaching about this Teruah, and then I was teaching about Revelation 19:6, and if you read all the way to 21, that sounds exactly what Teruah means. Exactly, the sound of victory and then the alarm of alarm of war, all mixed together. Anyway, that's my revelation, that is that event right there at the very end of the Great Tribulation, which is now, in my estimation, about almost 45 years from now. It will be in the fall. Of course, the Feast of Teruah is the first day of the 7th month. It's the very first festival in the fall festival grouping of the 7th month. And its fulfillment will be this event described in Revelation 19:6 to 21. And I'm saying that quite emphatically. That's my revelation. That if once I explained Teruah and then I read this, making my commentary of the last video, I said, hey, that's what it is. So what Christians have coined the rapture, the catching away, best fits right there at the very end of the Great Tribulation, when Yeshua returns in great power and great the most striking event of all eternity, the most widely proclaimed and loudest and everything all put together. That's the fulfillment of the Feast of Teruah. So when you look at 1 Thessalonians and 1 Corinthians, where we read about the rapture, so-called rapture, and the catching away, that's where it fits. But there is another event coming very soon where Yeshua comes as a thief in the night to find his bride. And I have said this a number of times, the attendants who find themselves on the other side of the line, they also are identified in that time frame. I don't know, soon or how many days later or how this will all work, but back to Rick Joyner's vision, he saw them as the first and second armies. And if you read the whole account, in his vision, the third army was the church of that day, which was about 25 to 30 years ago, which the first and second armies did not exist yet. So what I'm saying is now they exist, now they're being formed, and it's the It's the intense heat of the Great Tribulation, the refiner's fire, that is causing people to come out of this third army, which is this hugely dysfunctional church we call Christians and Jews, and they're becoming matured and refined, and they have prepared themselves to be either the bride or the bridesmaids. And okay, I think I covered that one enough. And then I want to go to why I have been saying that the tribulation started on October 2nd, 2017. There was a great sign that day. 9 days earlier, there was a great sign. And if you will look up September 23rd, 2017, you will, if you Google it, you will see there's quite a remarkable event happened that day. Lots of people are aware of it, but for those who aren't, just Google it and read it. What happened is there was a once in eternity that's been proposed. People have, with computer simulations, have recognized that this event had never happened in the past, and it will never happen in the future. Now, we get to find that out in eternity, but in let's say in the space of a few million years ahead and behind, it hasn't happened. It's a one-time event where Jupiter went through the womb of Virgo for exactly 9 months, and then on that day, September 23rd, the baby was born, came out of the womb of Virgo. So that Virgo's a well-known constellation, and this great sign told us that we are about to enter the final Jubilee of time. Now, this is me speaking. I'm interpreting all the bits and pieces, but one of the things that's not very well known is that September 23rd that year was the Feast of Teruah. And what I'm saying is God was announcing for all the ears that could hear that we are about to enter the final Jubilee of time. Now, why is 2017 the beginning of the Jubilee, the end of one Jubilee and the beginning of the next one, which happens on the Feast of the Day of Atonement, which was 9 days later. So God was announcing this is the Jubilee when Yeshua returns in great power and great glory, and as a thief in the night. First as a thief in the night, and then in great power and glory at the end of the Great Tribulation, which we know to be 50 years because we celebrate it every year. Not getting too far, am I? 33 minutes. Okay, so let's go back in history and let's first examine how God's Jubilee system works. That the 50th year was a very important year, and on that year, one of the things that happens, besides the land rests the second time in a row, the 49th year is a land rest, and then the 50th year is not only land rest, but the important thing that happens is all property is returned to its rightful owner. And it was in the year 1966, so in God's year, it was 66, 67, because that's how God's years work, from Day of Atonement to Day of Atonement. So I believe it was June 6th, was it? 1966. The most important piece of property in the universe, the city of Jerusalem, was returned to its rightful owner on that day and on that year. So that would mean that was the Jubilee year. So it's really quite simple. And then later on, I read a promise in the book of Jubilees that says, if you will keep the land Sabbath, then you will come to know when the Jubilee year is. So I use both to indicate my wife and I began keeping the land Sabbath the 7th year that we learned about God and started studying His ways and following His ways. and we've done our best to let the land keep its Sabbath in the years in between. And it was early on there that I read in, I believe it's the book of Deuteronomy, where the Lord declares that he said, during the Great Tribulation, the land will rest. I will make the land rest, the ones that you never gave it. So that's one of the things we're going to see as the years unfold ahead of us, that the crops will not be able to be put in and harvested. It may be done in a limited way in limited places, but that's one of the things that we know is going to happen. Anyway, so then the second step is that God, if I would do that, if you would do that, gardeners, farmers, then we would come to know when the Jubilee year is. So, and it's simple. It's the year that this piece of property was returned to its rightful owner, the house of Judah, the tribe of Judah and the house of Judah, who are the Jewish people. And in fact, if you study all the details, it actually belongs to all the tribes in the sense that the temple is to be built there, was and is to be built there. The next temple is going to be built there, likely in the city of David, as all the evidence points to. And that temple is for all the tribes, and at this point for both houses. But as I've been showing people, the two houses are going to be healed back together, and we'll have one functional nation of Israel again. And Jews and Christians will walk together, and they will accept each other's testimony. And it will become one testimony with two parts. Okay, so back to this Jubilee started, this final Jubilee of time, the one that Daniel pointed out, in the 70 sets of weeks, which means 70 Jubilees, that the last one, the last 50-year period, is the Great Tribulation. And we celebrate it every year when we count out 7 sevens between starting at the Feast of Firstfruits and then when it's complete, the 49 are complete, the day after, which is the 50th, is the Feast of Weeks, not Pentecost. Okay, I think I did a reasonable job there. So, number 4, the meaning of the 8 appointed times. Well, I got a few minutes left, and I guess I'm still going to have to reserve that for another video, but I did a pretty good job of some of them, and then I had to speed up. One of them I'd like to spend a little bit more time is the Day of Atonement itself. That the greatest event that's going to happen on that day is that Satan will be judged. And the name of this Satan, if you read the book of Enoch, you find there's about 200 high-ranking angels that rebelled against God. But there was only one ringleader, and his name was Azazel. Now, go to Leviticus 16, and read about the ceremonies that are to be conducted on the day of Atonement, which is not a feast day. It is a day of fasting. You don't drink water or eat food on that day. And there's these 2 goats that are picked, and one is assigned to the Lord, and the other is assigned to Azazel. And if you read the book of Enoch, you find that God eventually puts all the sin on the head of Azazel. He's the guy that was the ringleader in leading all the other fallen angels astray. How many are there? Well, as far as we know, there's these 200 high-ranking ones. Many of them are named in the book of Enoch. So, and then they, in their rebellion, they went outside the boundaries of their instructions, and they intermingled with human women, and they produced offspring who were, as it says in Genesis 6, were giants or men of renown. They, in fact, were, some of them were the legends that we find in Roman and Greek mythology. It's not mythology, it's more or less true, but these are crossbreeds between an angel and a human, and they were very evil. They had a very evil nature, and what God did is he destroyed them all physically, and their complete end came in the flood. But because they're living beings, they have a spirit, and they live on in a spirit essence, and that's who the demons are. So demons and fallen angels are two different entities. So that's a brief explanation, but read the book of Enoch for the full disclosure of these things. Okay, did I finish that one? I'm going to have to, okay, so let's speed ahead again and get right to the appointed time of the bride and the olive firstfruits. And that is, if you examine all the revelations in Scripture about the appointed times, one of the very important ones is Jubilee 6. It has the most complete explanation of the Feast of Firstfruits, is what God calls it. And it's a complete feast in that you start counting from the day, like that's the first day of the count of 7 weeks is the Feast of Firstfruits, and that feast itself belongs to the risen Yeshua. And the priest waved the sheaf of barley, and proposed that the many grains on the heads, so there'd be thousands of them, represent the bride in its raw form. Like the bride still has to be refined. And then in this analogy of counting out 7 sevens, we're talking about the Great Tribulation. It's the time of the refiner's fire when God will take all of the believing world, and he will put them through intense heat and find the ones that choose to obey him. And it's through this intense trial that this comes about. But the bride are a group of people who have allowed God to do this in their life ahead of time. They've prepared ahead of time. And so he has been looking for them in the last recent time. And I'm going to say, starting with the beginning of the tribulation, October 2nd, 2017. So we're almost to year 5 by the time we get to the fall feasts. The Day of Atonement this fall will be at year 5. And as I've pointed out, and Baruch pointed this out in 2nd Baruch, I believe it's 28, read verse 1 and 2, that the tribulation is 7 sevens long, that is a Jubilee, and it comes in 2 parts. And we know already that the second part is the final trek through the wilderness. So that's 40 years, so there's 10 to begin with. Now, I'm getting to the place I'm encouraging people to think outside the box, but so we're almost to 5 come this fall, and it really boils down to 9.5 years, then 40 years, and then there's a few months left in preparation for a few things. And we read about those few things back to Revelation 19, 6-21, that there's preparations made for the wedding. The bride has made herself ready. The attendants are there. The guests of the wedding have arrived. They've just gone through 40 years wandering in the wilderness as God tries them, and he finds what appears to be 10% that will obey him in keeping the Torah, his teachings and instructions, and they're all ready. The wedding is prepared. So that's the setting, and I'm out of time. So get to 5, out of the box scenario. I covered a little bit of that, but what I want you to do is make sure you go back to the commentary, say this one will be a little challenging because my wife and I are heading to Greece for 2 weeks. Find out what our assignments might be there. It always seems we take a trip and we do things for the Lord. So I'll do my best to make a commentary in the next today and tomorrow, and see you next time. This is Neil with Rock Our World.